Let's talk about training and recovery. In other words, the amount of training we can do to the recovery that is required for that. The higher the training volume, obviously we need more recovery time. The higher the training load, the more recovery is generally required. However, it depends on your fitness level. And fitness level is really the speed, effort, distance over a certain amount of time. If you can ride very fast up a steep incline over a long distance, that means you are fitter. So if you do a time trial and you ride for 1 hour, you need a speed over time type fitness. You don't need so much endurance. You need the endurance for the 1 hour period at that speed. If you do a mountain pass, which is 1,000 meters or 2,000 or 3,000 meters ascent in 100 kilometers, you obviously have a much higher effort over time. It's not so much the speed. So it's purely the speed you can do, the effort over the amount of time. So let's say a 1,000-meter ascent takes you 20 minutes. That gives you an average speed of maybe 15 kilometers an hour. The faster you can ride that effort, the higher the training load. Ultimately, for the long distance camping rides, I want to be able to run at a reasonable speed with a high degree of effort, because you're riding with a fully loaded camping bike in all sorts of weather conditions on all sorts of roads. So either ascents or descents or gravel roads or asphalt roads or off-road, and you're covering a certain distance. So let's say 80 kilometers per day or 150 kilometers a day. So that is your training load. So it's the speed you do over the effort you do, the distance you do. That is your training load. So for that training load, you also need a recovery period. The recovery period is then subject to your total fitness level. How able is your body to do this effort over the time frame? So the recovery requirement is measured by your resting heart rate in the morning, the next day basically. So if your resting heart rate is higher or elevated, then it's a good time to increase your resting period or decrease the training load. So when you're unfit, you will have a relatively low training load compared to your recovery period. And as you get fitter, you can increase the training load, keeping your recovery period more or less constant, because you would like to recover in, let's say, 12 or 24 hours. That is the time frame your muscles need to recover from the damage done during the training load. The better your body is adapted, the higher you can push this ratio. When you do an audax ride or you do randonneur, that is typically an event where you do longer distances, 200 kilometers or more, at your own speed, but within a certain time frame. So typically the minimum average speed is 15 kilometers per hour over the total event. That gives you a guideline on how intense the event is. Typically the events are between 200 and 1,200 kilometers, and you basically have to cover that distance in 15 kilometers an hour. Let's say you do a 400 kilometers. It takes you 22 or 23 hours, depending on the weather conditions, because wind can have a huge impact on the total time. You then need to be able to recover within a reasonable amount of time. So ideally, for a 400 kilometer event, you want to be recovered after 2 days. In other words, your muscle soreness should be virtually negligible after 2 days. Or you have to increase your recovery period a bit. So at the beginning of when you start doing a 400 kilometer ride, you probably need 2 weeks to recover or more. But at times we rode 300 kilometer events within 4 days of each other. And each one I did in like 16 hours. And then the next day I continued with my normal training program. But it's all subject to your resting heart rate in the morning. So why is the resting heart rate in the morning so important? That gives you a very simple, straightforward indication on how well you have recovered. If your resting heart rate is elevated more than 5 beats per minute, I would strongly recommend to increase the resting duration or decrease your training load significantly for the next or for that day, and measure your heart rate the next morning again. It will clearly give you a very sensible indication of how intense you can continue training. To recap, training load against recovery is your key indicator. If your recovery is poor, in other words, your resting heart rate in the morning is elevated, you have to decrease the training load. So the fitter you get means really that you can do a higher speed with a bigger effort over a longer distance in a certain time, maintaining your recovery ratio, in other words, your resting heart rate. And that's always measured every morning, especially the morning after the event. The training load can be changed by adapting the ratio between speed, effort, and distance. So you can do a higher speed for a shorter distance, or a higher effort, in other words, more ascent per kilometers traveled. So you either do 1,000 or 2,000 meters ascent over 100 kilometers, for example. Or you just do a lot of distance. So let's say 300 or 400 kilometers. Then you would have to possibly moderate your speed and your effort. So choose a route that doesn't have so many steep hills to climb or mountains to climb. Once you get better, you can increase the speed, increase the effort, and increase the duration. Doing 1,200 kilometers a mountain biking event in 4.5 days is a certain speed requirement, a very high effort, and a huge duration or distance. And from that you probably need some days to recover. It's enough talking for now. Let's get the bike, let's get the helmet, and let's do a few pedal strokes. See you next time. Ciao.